She was labeled the class loser, the one they laughed at, shoved in lockers, whispered about in hallways, the one every cruel joke was aimed at. 10 years later, they thought they could invite her back to the reunion to mock her again. But they had no idea what was coming. A black helicopter descended from the sky, blades slicing through the Maryland air. Eyes widened. Hearts raced. And when she stepped out, the timid girl they tormented was gone. In her place stood a woman they couldn't ignore, a woman unstoppable, powerful, and ready to rewrite every memory they thought defined her. Before we dive into Arlena's story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. It's amazing to think this story is reaching hearts across the country, or even the world, and I want to hear from you. Your voice matters, and it makes this journey feel even more real. The sun hung bright over the quiet Maryland high school courtyard, warming the brick walls as former classmates gathered in clusters. Laughter floated through the air, not the warm kind, but the sharp, cutting kind that always follows gossip. They hadn't changed. 10 years later, the cruelty still dripped from their voices like poison. Dawson Creed stood at the center, sunglasses on, arms folded, pretending he owned the place just like he did in senior year. Around him, old friends snickered as they scrolled through a group chat filled with jokes about one name, Arlena Salas. The girl they once called the class loser. The girl they invited only to humiliate again. She won't show? Dawson smirked. People like her never do. Too embarrassing for the queen of failure. Someone added, if she does come, bet she walks here. Another voice chimed in sarcastically, or hitchhikes. She probably still can't afford a bus ticket. The group burst into cruel laughter. Their words were cheap, but their confidence was loud, thick, unchallenged. Inside the decorated gym, the reunion banner sagged slightly, struggling under the weight of dusty memories. Someone had already prepared a slideshow of old yearbook photos, many featuring Arlena at her lowest moments. Dropped books, torn clothes, a shy face caught mid-embarrassment. They planned to play it the moment she walked in. Just outside, the day was calm, birds resting on the telephone wires, leaves barely rustling. No one noticed the first faint tremor in the air. At first it sounded like a distant lawn mower, something ordinary. No one cared. Dawson kept talking, arms flailing as he reenacted some old joke at Arlena's expense. Then the sound grew louder. A deep chopping rhythm pulsed across the sky, rattling the reunion banner from inside the gym. People paused, eyebrows rising. Conversations softened until only the thumping remained, a steady beat echoing across the school grounds. Phones lifted. Someone whispered, is that a helicopter? The group stepped outside into the bright sunlight, shielding their eyes. The wind picked up as the helicopter descended. Not military, not news, but sleek, polished, unmistakably expensive. Its shadow crawled across the courtyard, swallowing Dawson's smirk, silencing every voice that once felt untouchable. Nobody spoke now. Nobody laughed. The helicopter lowered slowly, sending dust swirling across the reunion entrance. Dresses fluttered, suits tugged in the wind. The students stumbled back, stunned and speechless. The machine settled with a heavy whoosh, blades slicing the air in slow, commanding rotations. For a long moment, no one moved. The door clicked. Every former bully, every whisperer, every conspirator held their breath as the cabin opened. A foot stepped out, steady, confident, belonging to someone who didn't flinch beneath 100 staring eyes. A figure emerged. Someone unrecognizable. Someone powerful. Someone they never expected to see. And it was Arlena Salas. She lifts her eyes toward them, and her expression makes Dawson's heart stop cold. If Arlena's story already gave you chills or made your heart race, show some love. Hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength comes from rising above pain. Every click helps more people hear stories of courage, resilience, and the power of never giving up. At 14, Arlena Salas walked the hallways of Crestwick Middle School like a shadow, quiet, careful, hoping no one would notice her. She clutched her worn backpack with both hands, its straps frayed from years of use. Her shoes were secondhand, the soles thinning. She kept her head down, not because she wanted to hide, but because looking up meant inviting trouble. And trouble always came. Dawson Creed led the pack back then, just as he would years later. He strutted through the halls like they were built for him alone, his friends trailing behind like loud, cruel echoes. They spotted Arlena every morning before she spotted them, and that small second of advantage was all they ever needed to unleash a fresh wave of insults. "Look, it's little Charity Case," Dawson would say, voice dripping with superiority. "Did your mom forget to iron your clothes again?" His friends laughed automatically, the way people do when they're afraid of losing their place in the pecking order. Arlena tried to keep moving, but they always stepped into her path. They talked about how her skin made her easy to lose in the dark, how she probably lived in a shoebox with 5 cousins, how she should thank them for even noticing her existence. Every word was a blade, small but cutting deeper each time. She learned to stay silent. Silence was safer. Silence didn't provoke them, but silence didn't protect her either. During lunch, she sat alone at a table near the back window, pretending she liked the quiet. She ate slowly, stretching her meals to make them last, hiding the fact that she didn't always have enough food at home. When a teacher approached her table, Arlena always straightened up, hoping for a moment of kindness. The teachers tried. They did, but Dawson's charm fooled most of them. He was good at being polite when adults were near. Too good. One cold October morning, Arlena stood at her locker sorting through her books when she felt something strike her shoulder. A crumpled paper ball rolled to the floor. When she turned, Dawson leaned against the wall, one eyebrow raised, a smirk sliding across his face. "Oops," he said. "Thought you were a trash can." A few onlookers laughed. Arlena closed her eyes for a second, steadying her breath. She bent to pick up the paper, but before she could, someone snatched it up and shoved it into her locker. Another laugh. Another sting. That afternoon, she tried to blend into her seat in English class, hoping to slip through the rest of the day unnoticed. But Dawson sat 2 rows behind her, and she could feel his stare crawling up her back. The teacher stepped out for a moment, and in that brief window, Dawson's chance arrived. He stood, walked casually to the teacher's desk, and slipped something from his pocket. He placed it deep beneath a stack of papers, quick, unseen by most. When he returned to his seat, he nudged his friend with a quiet snicker. Moments later, the teacher returned and reached for her phone on the desk, except it wasn't there. Her eyes widened. She searched the drawers. Then her gaze landed on Arlena, the only student sitting stiff, terrified of attention. "Arlena," she said slowly, "can you check your backpack, please?" The room turned into a living cage, every head swiveling toward her. Arlena froze, her heartbeat in her throat. Dawson leaned back, arms crossed, watching. When the teacher approached, she reached under Arlena's desk and pulled out the phone Dawson had planted. Gasps erupted. Dawson feigned shock. Someone whispered, "Of course it was her." The teacher's disappointment cut deeper than the accusation. "Arlena Solace," she said, voice firm. "Come with me." Now, as the class stared at her like she was something dirty, Arlena felt her world collapse under the weight of another lie she couldn't fight. The teacher grabbed her arm and marched her toward the principal's office, while Dawson smiled triumphantly in the doorway. Arlena's mother, Marielle Solace, always said the world could be cruel, but it didn't have to change who you were. She said it each time Arlena came home with red eyes and trembling hands, each time she tried to swallow her hurt to keep from worrying her mother. But Marielle always saw it. She had lived her own battles once, scars tucked beneath her soft voice and strong posture. That evening, after the accusation at school, Arlena sat on the edge of her bed, gripping a pillow so tightly her fingers ached. Marielle entered quietly, her scent of lavender and old books filling the small room. She sat beside her daughter without speaking, giving the kind of silence that heals instead of harms. When Arlena finally whispered, "I didn't take it," her voice cracked like something fragile breaking open. "I know you didn't," Marielle said, brushing a hand through her daughter's hair. "You don't have to convince me, baby. It's just they believe him. They always do." Arlena's eyes glistened. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Marielle cupped her daughter's chin gently. "Existing doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes people break others apart just to feel whole themselves." Her thumb wiped a tear from Arlena's cheek. "But you keep your integrity. That's your shield. They can't take that unless you hand it to them." Arlena nodded, but her chest still felt heavy, as if her lungs were made of stone. The next morning, Marielle walked her to school, holding her hand the way she used to when Arlena was small. The autumn air was crisp, the wind carrying the scent of wet pavement. Marielle squeezed her hand once before they entered the building. "Remember," she said, "your voice matters, even when no one listens." But when Arlena reached the office, hope faded like steam on glass. The principal, Mr. Halford, sat behind his desk, arms crossed, expression stiff. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't look at the students' previous complaints about Dawson. He didn't acknowledge the teacher's uncertainty about how the phone ended up there. He simply said, "Arlena, given your history of disagreements with other students, we have no choice but to suspend you for 3 days." Arlena felt the floor tilt beneath her. She tried to speak, but her voice evaporated. Marielle stepped forward, anger simmering in her eyes, but Mr. Halford raised a hand as if silencing her before she could defend her child. "It's decided," he said firmly. Dawson walked past the office at that exact moment, hands in his pockets, a satisfied grin plastered across his face. He didn't even try to hide it. His friends lingered behind him, whispering like snakes in tall grass. As Arlena left the building, her suspension slip clutched in her fist, she overheard a group of students laughing. She really thought she'd get away with it? Pathetic. Marielle guided her daughter outside, whispering soothing words, though her own jaw trembled with anger. She opened the car door for Arlena like she was something precious, something the world had carelessly mishandled. But the day wasn't finished. That evening, while Arlena sat on the couch staring blankly at the muted TV, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Dozens of notifications, group chats lighting up, laughter emojis, screenshots. She opened one message, and her stomach dropped. A video of Dawson and his friends reenacting the moment she was accused, pretending to cry, mocking her hair, making jokes about poor little Arlena stealing shiny things. The video had spread through the entire school in hours, and it was getting worse by the second. The next week at Crestwick Middle felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every whisper carved another cut. Every glance carried silent judgment. Arlena kept her shoulders tight and her steps small, wishing she could fold herself into a corner and disappear. She tried to speak up. She really did. First, she went to Mr. Halford's office to explain calmly that she'd been framed. He barely looked up from his computer. "Arlena," he sighed. "Sometimes accepting consequences is the first step toward maturity." "But I didn't do anything," she said, voice trembling. He waved a dismissive hand. "Dwelling on it won't change what happened." Next, she approached her English teacher, hoping the woman might remember Dawson's suspicious behavior. Instead, she received a thin smile and a pat on the shoulder. "Just avoid those boys," the teacher said. "Try not to provoke them." Arlena nearly laughed. She provoked them? How? By breathing? The message was clear. No adults were going to help her. She walked through the halls feeling smaller, quieter, almost hollow. Even the few classmates who didn't dislike her avoided eye contact, afraid of becoming targets themselves. But one person didn't look away. Lyndon Ray. He wasn't popular. He wasn't loud. He wasn't anything special to most people. But to Arlena, his kindness was a lifeline. He was the kind of boy who held doors open because he believed in manners, not attention. The kind who carried extra pencils because someone always forgot theirs. The kind who didn't laugh when everyone else did. When Arlena sat alone at lunch, he approached her table with a hesitant smile. "Can I sit?" he asked softly. She nodded, surprised. He sat across from her, opening his lunch quietly. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Lyndon cleared his throat. "I saw the video," he whispered. Arlena froze, staring down at her sandwich. "And?" she murmured, bracing herself. "And it was awful," he said. "Not what you did, what they did. I'm really sorry." His voice was gentle, but it shook her anyway. No one had said that. Not a single person. She swallowed. "It doesn't matter. No one's going to believe me. I believe you." He held her gaze. "And someday, maybe not now, maybe not soon, but someday, they won't matter. You're going to outgrow this place. People like them never do." The words cracked something inside her, something that had been braced too tightly for too long. She felt seen, if only for a moment. But moments were short-lived here. Later that afternoon, Arlena went to the locker room to change after gym class. She took her time, waiting for most of the other girls to leave. The room echoed faintly with dripping faucets and distant shouts from the gym. She opened her locker, taking a steady breath. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. She turned, and saw Dawson standing in the doorway, his two closest friends blocking the exit behind him. Their expressions told her everything before he even spoke. Well, Dawson drawled, stepping closer. Look who thinks she can run her mouth to teachers. Arlena's heart thudded painfully. The room felt suddenly smaller. She took one step back. Dawson smirked. Let's have a little chat. Before she could reach the door, the boys closed in, trapping her against the cold metal lockers. Marielle didn't wait for another incident. She didn't need to. Arlena's broken expression after the locker room encounter said everything. That night, while Arlena lay curled beneath her blankets trying to breathe through the memory, her mother sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out, her jaw set, her eyes shining with fierce determination. By morning, the decision had been made. We're leaving Maryland, Marielle said gently, kneeling beside Arlena's bed. I found work in New Jersey. It'll be different there. We'll start over. Arlena blinked slowly. Part relief, part fear, part disbelief. Are you sure? She whispered. I'm sure about you, her mother answered. And that's enough. They packed in silence, folding clothes, boxing memories, throwing away things that carried too much hurt. Every item Arlena touched seemed stained by the cruelty she'd endured. The backpack Dawson ripped, the shirt she had been teased for wearing, the notebooks filled with pages she pretended to write on so people wouldn't notice she sat alone. When they loaded the last box into the trunk, Arlena took one final look at the brick apartment building. She thought she'd feel triumph, but all she felt was a heavy kind of sadness, the sadness of a childhood cut short. Maryland had been her home, but also her battlefield. She wasn't leaving victorious, she was fleeing. The drive to New Jersey was long. Hours of highway stretched endlessly before them, dotted with rest stops, gas stations, and fleeting conversations. Sometimes Arlena stared out the window, watching towns blur into colorless streaks. Other times she leaned her head against the seat, letting exhaustion cradle her. Marielle reached over at one point and brushed her daughter's hand. You're not broken, Arlena, she said softly. You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounds heal. Arlena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. When they finally crossed into New Jersey, the sky was turning golden, sunset spilling like honey across the clouds. The town of Levington seemed quiet and peaceful, lined with modest houses and maple trees. It felt smaller than Maryland, less chaotic, almost hopeful. Their new home sat at the end of a short street. A pale yellow townhouse with a small porch and two windows that faced the road. Not perfect, but stable. Safe, hopefully. Marielle parked the car and gave Arlena a hopeful smile. This is where things get better, she said. Arlena wanted to smile back. She wanted to believe it, wanted to breathe without fear for the first time in years. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her shoes. For a moment, she stood still, letting the cool breeze wash over her. But the moment collapsed as soon as they reached the front door. Arlena froze. Marielle gasped. The porch, the walls near the door, even the mailbox, were covered in crude, hateful graffiti. Slurs. Ugly drawings. Words meant to bruise and break. Red spray paint dripped down the siding like blood. Someone had written, "Go back where you came from," across the door. Marielle pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. Arlena felt her stomach twist into knots. This was supposed to be their safe place, their new beginning, their escape. But cruelty had followed them, fast, hungry, uninvited. As they stood frozen on the porch, a shadowy figure down the street stepped behind a tree, watching them silently. The next few weeks in New Jersey were a slow climb out of darkness. The graffiti was scrubbed off, apologies were offered by neighbors who claimed they had no idea who did it. And Marielle pushed forward with a strength Arlena wished she possessed. But inside, Arlena was shaken. She stepped carefully, spoke softly, always calculating risk. Trauma had taught her to expect harm even in quiet moments. Then came Mr. Caldwell. He entered her life like sunlight cracking through a storm cloud, gentle, warm, and unexpected. He taught 8th grade history at Levington Middle, a thin man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard that made him look older than he probably was. On her first day, he noticed her right away, not because she stood out, but because she tried not to. During roll call, when he reached her name, she whispered "here," barely lifting her eyes. After class, he asked her to stay behind. She panicked at first. expecting the familiar throb of judgment. But instead, he closed his grade book, folded his hands on his desk, and said, "You're carrying more on your shoulders than a girl your age should. I don't know what it is yet, but I can see you're trying. And trying matters." His words knocked the air from her lungs. She tried to brush it off. She didn't trust kindness anymore. It always came with a catch. But Mr. Caldwell didn't push. He simply treated her the same way every day, with patience, consistency, and respect. Little by little, she began to meet his eyes, then answer questions, then ask them. Weeks passed, and something strange happened. Arlena started to excel. Mr. Caldwell noticed her talent for writing, her ability to describe history not as dates and names, but as living stories shaped by courage and fear. He encouraged her to enter essay contests. He helped her develop study habits that made school feel conquerable. He reminded her that the world was bigger than Crestwick Middle or the bullies she left behind. "You're not running anymore," he said once after returning a perfect test score. "You're rising." Arlena didn't believe she was rising. Not fully, but she was no longer sinking. Even outside class, Mr. Caldwell made her feel safe. He spoke to her like she mattered, like her ideas were worth listening to. He asked how she was doing without prying. He reminded her that some adults do care, even when others fail terribly. Marielle noticed the shift too. Arlena walked taller. She smiled occasionally. At dinner, she talked about school for the first time in years. For a while, things were good. Not perfect, but good enough to feel like healing. Then, one cold morning in November, everything changed. Arlena sat in Mr. Caldwell's classroom during a group activity. The room buzzed with chatter as students compared notes. Mr. Caldwell paced between desks, offering help where needed. He paused beside Arlena, checking her worksheet with a proud nod. "You're going to do great things," he whispered. She smiled, a real one. He turned to walk toward the front of the classroom, took one step, then another. Then he staggered. His hand flew to his chest. His face twisted in pain. The classroom noise faded into a thick, terrifying silence. "Mr. Caldwell," someone said shakily. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. His knees buckled. Papers spilled from his hands. A low groan escaped him as he collapsed to the floor, landing hard. Screams erupted. Chairs scraped back. A student ran for the door. Arlena froze, her world narrowing to the sight of the one person who had believed in her lying motionless on the classroom tiles. Mr. Caldwell's eyes fluttered closed, and Arlena realized with a crushing jolt that he might not wake up again. Arlena froze, phone trembling in her hand. She didn't need to think twice to know what he wanted. He always wanted something. The man who had abandoned her as a child now stood outside her apartment, asking for money as though the years of absence had erased his debts to her. She opened the door slowly, heart hammering, and there he was, older, rougher, eyes hollow and calculating. He smiled, a thin, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Arlena," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." "I don't have time," she said sharply, trying to close the door. But he blocked it. "It won't take long. I know you've been successful. You've got money now. I just need a small loan." Arlena's chest tightened. A small loan? After years of absence? After everything? She stepped back, shaking her head. "You've got nerve," she said, voice barely controlled. "Do you know what I went through without you?" He shrugged, unbothered. "Life's hard, kid. I just need a hand. You can spare it." Something inside her snapped. Not rage, not sorrow, but a cold clarity. She reached into her wallet. Just a few bills, a small emergency fund she kept tucked away for safety. She handed them over. But that wasn't enough. The next day, Arlena discovered her bank account drained. Every cent she had saved for Bridgebright, for rent, for survival, gone. Her father had transferred it all to himself. Betrayal crashed over her like a wave. She stared at the screen, disbelief and rage twisting together until her hands shook. The man who had promised nothing his whole life had taken even the little she trusted him to leave untouched. Marielle sat beside her, silent at first, her hand gripping Arlena's shoulder. Then she spoke, voice calm but fierce. "Don't let him win. Don't let him take your fire." Arlena wiped her tears and nodded, swallowing the sobs that threatened to break her. She couldn't quit. Not now. Not after Mr. Caldwell. Not after all the sacrifices she had made. She doubled down. Longer shifts at the bakery. More tutoring hours. Nights at the gym. Every waking hour was a calculation, a strategy, a step toward rebuilding what had been stolen. Weeks blurred into exhaustion. She ran on caffeine, determination, and anger. The city felt endless, the apartment too small, the nights too long. Then, one freezing morning, after a 12-hour day at the bakery and 4 hours tutoring, she stepped into her studio apartment, dropped her bag, and felt her body betray her. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the futon, face pressed into the thin mattress. Every muscle ached. Every bone screamed. Every ounce of energy, every bit of hope, every shred of fight. She had poured into surviving, and now her body reminded her she was human. Marielle rushed to her side, shaking her gently. "Arlena, breathe. Look at me, breathe." But Arlena couldn't respond. Exhaustion, grief, and anger had merged into a weight she could no longer hold. And in that moment, lying there, she realized that surviving alone in this city came with costs even determination couldn't always prevent. She drifted into darkness on the futon, unaware that outside her window, the first signs of an unexpected opportunity were beginning to form, a chance that could change everything if she could just wake up to see it. Arlena woke to a blinding glare and the sound of distant sirens. Her head throbbed, her mouth tasted of iron and dust. She tried to move, but a firm hand pressed gently against her shoulder, steadying her. "Easy," a calm voice said. "You're going to be okay." She squinted through the haze and saw him, a tall man with dark hair and sharp eyes, wearing a simple jacket that somehow radiated quiet authority. Who are you?" she croaked, voice barely above a whisper. "Name's Silas Ward," he said, kneeling beside her. "I saw you collapse outside your building. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere until you're safe." Confusion and embarrassment flooded her. I don't need help," she mumbled, attempting to push herself upright. "You do," he said firmly but kindly. "Trust me, you're exhausted. You've been running yourself ragged." Reluctantly, she let him guide her to his car. The warmth inside, the soft hum of the engine, and the concern in his eyes felt foreign, almost dangerous, yet reassuring. Silas stayed close, insisting she call a doctor, and eventually helped her into a clinic. They waited together, sitting in uncomfortable chairs that somehow felt lighter in his presence. As the doctor examined her, Silas leaned back, arms crossed, studying her not with judgment, but with careful attention. When the doctor finally nodded, saying she needed rest and fluids, he helped her settle into the hospital's lounge chairs. "Thank you," she whispered, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just make sure you take care of yourself. You're stronger than you think, but even the strongest need help sometimes." Arlena stared at him. There was something different about him, a sincerity she hadn't seen in years. Most people in her life had demanded, mocked, or abandoned her. Silas didn't ask for anything. He just offered steady support. Over the next hour, they talked cautiously. She learned he lived nearby and ran a small consulting business. He asked about her work, her ambitions, and listened, not as someone judging, but as someone genuinely interested. "You have an idea worth fighting for," he said finally, leaning forward. "Not many people your age get that far, especially alone. I can tell you've poured your heart into it." She felt a flicker of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. "Bridgebright," she said, testing the name aloud. "I've been trying to get it off the ground." Silas's eyes lit up, but he didn't gush. He nodded thoughtfully. "I like it. It's ambitious. Social impact. Mentorship. That's the kind of thing that makes a difference." Arlena exhaled, tension easing slightly. "I don't know if anyone would even invest," she admitted. "I've been scraping by for years." He smiled faintly, but there was intensity behind it. "Maybe you just need the right person to see your vision." For the first time in years, Arlena felt a spark, a fragile, electric thread of possibility. She realized she wasn't completely alone. Someone saw her. Someone believed in the work she had poured herself into. Then, leaning closer, Silas lowered his voice. "If you're serious, Arlena, I'm a small-scale investor. I can help you get started properly. You won't have to do it all alone anymore." Her heart skipped. She blinked, unsure whether to trust hope or fear it would vanish like everything else had before. She looked at him, pulse racing, realizing that this stranger might be the first real chance she had to turn her dream into reality, and that giving him a chance could change everything. Within months, Arlena's life shifted in ways she had only dared to imagine. With Silas's small investment and mentorship, she moved to California, leasing a modest office space in downtown San Francisco. The sunlight poured through tall windows, painting her plans, sketches, and whiteboards in warm hues. Every detail, every line of code, every marketing draft, every meeting with potential mentors felt like stepping closer to a future she had fought for. Her team was small but dedicated: 2 coders, a designer, and a part-time operations assistant. Each morning, Arlena arrived early, fueled by the memory of every hardship, every betrayal, every sleepless night. Coffee in hand, she would pace the room, checking progress, brainstorming solutions, and motivating her team with a quiet fire that demanded attention without shouting. BridgeBright slowly took shape. The prototype became a functioning platform connecting mentors and teens. Emails from schools poured in. Volunteers signed up. Local press began to notice, calling it innovative and inspirational. Arlena's hard work was paying off, and for the first time in her life, success tasted like more than survival. Evenings were long. She still worked double shifts when needed, attending networking events, pitching investors, and balancing the tiny apartment she rented above the office. The grind was brutal, but it was hers. Every setback felt smaller because she had finally gained the tools to fight back. Her confidence surged, but she never forgot the lessons of her past. When old insecurities threatened to surface, self-doubt, fear of betrayal, she reminded herself of Mr. Caldwell's words: lead with purpose. Build something that gives people a chance. They became a mantra, a shield against any lingering shadow of her former life. BridgeBright's first milestone arrived quietly, their first successful full-scale mentor match. A local teen, previously struggling in school, connected with a software engineer willing to guide her weekly. Arlena read the follow-up emails late into the night, tears of quiet satisfaction rolling down her cheeks. She had created more than a platform. She had created hope. But as progress surged, adversity lurked nearby. One evening, after returning late from a pitch event in Silicon Valley, she entered the office to find smoke curling from the vents. Alarms blared, piercing through her exhaustion. She ran toward the source, heart hammering, dread filling every vein. The office was engulfed in flames. Papers, equipment, and her carefully organized plans crackled and fell to the floor in seconds. The smell of burning plastic and ink filled the air, making her cough and gag. She grabbed a few irreplaceable items, some sketches, a notebook, a photo of Mr. Caldwell. But the fire spread faster than she could contain. Her team evacuated as firefighters arrived, spraying torrents of water into the inferno. Arlena stood outside, drenched in sweat and smoke, staring at the blackened shell of her office. The months of hard work, every late night, every sacrifice, it all seemed to vanish in a heartbeat. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to crumble entirely. She bent down, picking up the notebook she had managed to save. Flipping through the pages, she whispered to herself, voice shaking but determined, "We rebuild. We rise again." As the flames consumed what she had built, a phone notification flashed, an email from a potential investor who could change everything, but only if she acted before tomorrow. The fire left a blackened skeleton of her office, but Arlena refused to let it define her. She spent that night in her tiny apartment, notebook in hand, planning every step to rebuild BridgeBright. The destruction had stolen materials, computers, and some of her team's personal belongings, but it hadn't touched her vision. By morning, she had drafted a blueprint for a new office space, streamlined processes, and reached out to investors and volunteers. Silas Ward called hours later, his voice firm yet reassuring. "This is temporary. You've built resilience before. You'll build it again. Let's get the new space tomorrow." Arlena barely slept that week, moving furniture, coordinating with contractors, coding late into the night on borrowed laptops. She set up emergency fund campaigns, social media updates, and volunteer support programs, showing the public that BridgeBright was not just surviving, it was thriving despite adversity. Soon, local newspapers picked up the story. "Startup rises from fire to empower teens," read one headline. Online publications featured her determination, praising the young founder who refused to quit despite overwhelming odds. Arlena watched interviews and articles circulate, a mix of pride and disbelief warming her chest. Her face appeared in videos, her story told in clips that emphasized grit, vision, and perseverance. Bridgebright began to grow exponentially. Schools from neighboring cities requested partnerships, and mentoring matches increased tenfold. Arlena held team meetings daily, her confidence surging with each success. Her mornings began with coding sprints and ended with media calls. Exhaustion lingered, but this time it was different, a fatigue born of building, not surviving. For the first time, Arlena allowed herself to feel that she was in control of her life. The ghosts of Maryland, of Dawson Creed, of her father's betrayal, they still lingered, but they no longer defined her. She had created something bigger than fear, something tangible, impactful, alive. Then one evening, as she was about to close her laptop, her phone pinged with a message notification. She thought it would be another investor follow-up, another mentor inquiry, maybe even a congratulatory note from Silas. It wasn't. The name on the screen made her pulse skip. Dawson Creed. The message was brief. Hey, Arlena. It's been a long time. 10-year reunion coming up. Would love to see you there. Don't be a stranger. Arlena stared at the words, disbelief knotting her stomach. 10 years had passed. The same boy who tormented her, humiliated her, and caused years of pain now extended an invitation. Curious, casual, presumptuous. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to delete the message immediately, erase the reminder of old wounds. Another part of her felt a flicker, an ember of curiosity, of unfinished business. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, imagining the girl she had been at Crestwick Middle School. The quiet, frightened, cornered girl who once had no choice. Then she pictured herself now, confident, capable, unstoppable. A woman who had survived fire, literally, and had built a platform that changed lives. The contrast was stark. The power had shifted, and she realized that if she chose to go, she wouldn't be walking in as the same frightened girl. She tapped out a single, deliberate reply. I'll be there. The night she received Dawson's message, Arlena sat in her apartment, the city lights flickering against the walls like distant stars. She reread the text again, trying to decide whether it was curiosity or recklessness that made her fingers hover over the reply button. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the sharp anticipation of a reckoning long overdue. She thought about every humiliation, every stolen opportunity, every cruel joke that had followed her through Maryland and beyond. Yet, something inside her whispered that facing them now would not be weakness, it would be power. Closure. Proof that she had survived, grown, and thrived in ways they couldn't touch. Her mother, Marielle, sat nearby, knitting quietly but watching her daughter's face with wary eyes. You're sure you want to do this? She asked softly. I have to, Arlena said, voice steady. Not for them. For me. I can't let this linger anymore. I need to show them who I am now. Marielle hesitated, then nodded. Just be careful. People like that rarely change. Arlena exhaled, feeling a tense thrill as she clicked send. The reply. I'll be there. It was simple, calculated. A small spark of courage igniting into something bolder. In the following days, preparations took on a surreal edge. She shopped for the perfect outfit. Not too flashy, not too timid. Something that conveyed confidence without arrogance. She rehearsed conversations in her head, envisioning every scenario, every potential insult. She walked through the streets of New York and San Francisco in her mind, retracing old lessons in composure, self-respect, and inner strength. But unease lingered. Even as excitement bubbled under her skin, she couldn't shake the feeling that Dawson's invitation carried more than curiosity. There was a venomous undertone, the same subtle cruelty that had haunted her teenage years. It whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. Then, days before the reunion, it happened. Arlena received a forwarded message from an anonymous source, a student from Crestwick High. Hesitant, she pressed play on the attached audio file. Instantly, the room seemed to shrink. The voice was unmistakable. Dawson, his friends laughing in the background. Can you believe she actually might show up? He sneered. 10 years later, still that same loser. Let's see if she'll cry this time, just like in 8th grade. Another voice laughed cruelly, repeating jokes from middle school. Comments about her hair, her clothes, even her family. The words cut sharper than any blade, deliberate and merciless. Arlena's hands clenched around the phone, knuckles white. Rage bubbled alongside memories she had tried to bury. She could feel the pulse of anger, but also a strange calm. The old fear wasn't there anymore, replaced by the awareness that she had outgrown their power. She had built her life, her accomplishments, her identity, far beyond what they could mock. And yet, the knowledge that this mockery was already planned, coordinated, intentional, sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a casual reunion. It was a trap, a stage built for humiliation, rehearsed by people who had once defined her pain. Arlena swallowed hard, heart pounding. She remembered Mr. Caldwell's voice echoing in her mind. "You're stronger than you think. Lead with purpose." Her resolve solidified. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. This was the moment to reclaim her story. As she packed her bag for the flight, her phone buzzed again. Another forwarded message. This time, a photo, Dawson standing in front of the decorated gym, surrounded by old classmates, all grinning maliciously, waiting for her arrival. Arlena sat at her kitchen table, blueprints and sketches spread out in front of her, her laptop open to a spreadsheet titled Reunion Arrival Plan. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the storm building in her mind. She traced her fingers over the names of former classmates, each one carrying memories she had fought hard to bury. The message from Dawson, the leaked audio, the photo, they were reminders of every humiliation, every doubt, every night she had spent crying in silence. But this time, she refused to let fear dictate her. She wasn't the timid girl hiding behind textbooks or apologies anymore. She was a woman who had fought fire, betrayal, and countless obstacles, and she had risen. Silas had been her first call, the man who had seen her potential, invested in her dreams, and believed when no one else did. She explained the plan. She wouldn't simply show up. She wanted a statement, a bold, undeniable declaration that the girl they thought they could break had grown into someone unstoppable. "I want them to see me," she said firmly, "not the scared, cornered version of me from middle school. I want them to feel the weight of what I've become." Silas listened, nodding slowly. "I like it. You've earned this moment, Arlena. If you want, I can make sure it's unforgettable." Her lips curved into a small, determined smile. "I want unforgettable." For hours, they discussed logistics, timing, and dramatic effect. Arlena was meticulous. Every second of her arrival had to reflect confidence, grace, and power. Her outfit, her entrance, even the angle from which she would approach the gym, nothing was left to chance. She rehearsed mental scenarios, practiced calm breaths, and visualized the faces of the bullies as she finally reclaimed control. By evening, she felt a strange combination of excitement and clarity. The fear that had once dominated her life had been replaced with purpose. She wasn't seeking revenge in petty forms. She was claiming what had always belonged to her, her dignity, her story, her voice. Silas leaned back, assessing her with the careful attention of someone who had seen her triumph over impossible odds before. "You're ready. More than ready. This isn't just a reunion for them. It's a moment that defines your journey." Arlena nodded, absorbing every word. Her pulse quickened as the implications settled in. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a lesson for everyone who had doubted her, mocked her, or tried to minimize her worth. They finalized the plan, every detail precise. Silas smiled faintly, tapping on his phone. "One more thing," he said. Arlena raised an eyebrow. "What now?" "I booked a helicopter," he said, his tone measured, confident. "You won't just walk in. You'll arrive above them, on your own terms. Dramatic, commanding, unmistakable." Her heart skipped. The thought of hovering above the courtyard, thousands of eyes potentially looking up at her, sent a thrill through her veins. It wasn't just about spectacle. It was about reclaiming power, controlling the narrative, and finally closing the chapter of fear and humiliation once and for all. Arlena's lips pressed into a line of determination. She could almost hear Mr. Caldwell's voice in her head. "Lead with purpose. Build something that gives people a chance." Today, it wasn't just about her. It was about claiming that purpose in front of the people who had once tried to erase her. She exhaled slowly, standing from the table. Every fear, every doubt, every moment of past pain sharpened into resolve. The girl who had run, cowered, and hidden was gone. The woman who would arrive above the courtyard tomorrow, unstoppable, unapologetic, undeniable, was ready. As Silas handed her the boarding details, Arlena looked down at the helicopter keys, her pulse racing. She realized the moment of reckoning was no longer just imagined. It was seconds away. The morning sun barely pierced through the low-hanging clouds as the helicopter descended toward her childhood town in Maryland. Arlena's stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the weight of memory pressing against her chest. The familiar streets stretched out below, lined with red brick row houses, cracked sidewalks, and the same maple trees whose shadows had once mocked her as a child. Even from above, she could see the corner store where she had bought snacks with the few coins she could save, the empty lot where Dawson and his friends had chased her in games that had never felt like play, and the playground where she had cried silently, convinced no one would ever see her pain. Her heart ached with nostalgia and fury entwined. Every street corner whispered fragments of her past, whispered taunts, stolen lunches, humiliating rumors, and tears shed in quiet bathrooms. She gripped the edge of the seat as the helicopter lowered closer to the ground, grounding her in a place that had once made her feel invisible, powerless, and small. When the helicopter touched down in an open field near the edge of town, she stepped out, her boots crunching against gravel. The air smelled of asphalt and damp grass, the scent igniting memories she hadn't realized were still alive inside her. Every step along the cracked streets carried the ghosts of a girl who had hidden behind books, who had swallowed insults, who had learned to survive in silence. She paused at her old school, Crestwick Middle. The building seemed smaller than she remembered, its walls faded and dull. But the pain remained, thick and pungent, lingering in the air like a stubborn shadow. She ran her hand along the metal fence, recalling the moments she had tried to disappear, the whispered jokes about her hair and clothes, the sting of being singled out for who she was and what she didn't have. The memories pressed harder with every step. She walked past the old bus stop, past her first corner store, past the cracked sidewalk where she had once tripped and been laughed at by a group of classmates. Her chest felt heavy, each inhalation a reminder of the years she had carried the weight of humiliation. Yet beneath the ache, a subtle strength simmered, proof that she had endured, thrived, and grown far beyond these streets. She rounded a corner near a gas station, lost in the blend of memory and present, when movement caught her eye. There he was, Dawson Creed. The same smirk, the same posture that had haunted her adolescence. He was standing by a pump, chatting with a friend, casual, oblivious. His back was half-turned, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. Arlena's breath caught, not out of fear, but anticipation. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. He didn't know the woman she had become, the battle she had fought, the company she had built, or the storm of confidence and power she carried within her. For a moment, she felt the old surge of adrenaline, the familiar mix of fear and thrill. But this time, it wasn't about running. It wasn't about hiding. It was about watching, calculating, preparing. The girl he once mocked had become someone unrecognizable, someone unstoppable. Dawson adjusted his cap, turned, and for a split second, his gaze swept the street, straight toward Arlena. She held her stance, calm and deliberate, as the corners of his mouth twitched in curiosity. The gymnasium smelled faintly of polish and air freshener, an attempt to mask the decades of sweat and echoes of high school chaos. Streamers hung in festive colors, and tables were arranged neatly along the walls, red plastic cups, and hors d'oeuvres waiting for the first arrivals. It was a perfect stage, perfect for them, perfect for their trap. Inside, Dawson Creed and his old cronies huddled around a laptop, their voices low but sharp with malice. "She's coming," one whispered, smirking. "I bet she still thinks she belongs here." Dawson clicked through a folder filled with images from middle and high school. Old yearbook photos, awkward hairstyles, failed science fair projects, crumpled trophies. The group laughed quietly at the captions they'd added, mocking comments about her weight, her hair, her clothes, even her laugh. "She's going to love this," Dawson sneered, leaning closer. "Let's show her the highlight reel of her loser life." Others in the group giggled, sharing sly glances, energized by the thought of seeing her squirm. They arranged the slideshow on the gym's projector, adjusting the volume and timing to maximize humiliation. Someone brought in a microphone, pretending to be courteous, while planning to narrate each image with dripping sarcasm. The room felt electric with anticipation. Each second the group whispered, plotted, and positioned chairs was another second closer to their intended spectacle. Every hallway outside the gym echoed faintly with the steps of arriving alumni, but none of them were aware of the sinister focus centered on one person, Arlena. Meanwhile, Dawson glanced at his watch repeatedly, smirking as if he could already feel her panic building. She'll come through that door thinking she's in control. Cute, isn't it? He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through the captions once more. Each insult, each joke, meticulously curated to cut deep. There was a cruel artistry in their preparation, a rehearsed choreography designed to remind Arlena of every moment of pain they had inflicted over a decade ago. But as they finalized the last slide, as they practiced the timing of the mock applause and laughter, a sudden vibration shook the gym. The floor rattled faintly beneath their feet. One of Dawson's friends frowned, glancing around nervously. "Did you feel that?" The sound grew louder, a low hum that reverberated through the walls, the ceiling, and the tables. A gust of wind made the streamers tremble, and the open windows rattled under a pressure that hadn't been there moments before. Dawson scowled, irritation flashing across his face. "It's probably just a truck outside," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Then the sound grew, thicker, heavier, undeniable. The blades of a helicopter. The whirring shook the gym again, rattling the projector screen, causing chairs to wobble, and sending a ripple of unease through the group. The carefully constructed laughter and mockery faltered. They exchanged uncertain glances, the air suddenly charged with tension instead of amusement. Something was coming. Something big. Something that wasn't part of their plan. And outside, above the roof of the high school gym, a helicopter hovered, blades cutting through the crisp Maryland air, casting its shadow over the building. Dawson turned toward the windows, squinting at the approaching shadow, and froze. His smirk faltered as realization hit. Whatever was coming was not the scared girl he remembered. The roar of the helicopter filled the gym with deafening sound, shaking the floor and rattling the windows. Students and alumni alike froze mid-conversation, drinks forgotten, laughter strangled by the sheer force of the blades slicing through the air. Teachers peeked from hallways, eyebrows raised, while Dawson's smug expression faltered into something closer to panic. Outside, the helicopter circled slowly, its shadow sweeping across the courtyard like a moving storm. Dust and leaves swirled in its wake, and the crowd that had been gathered outside for photos, mingling, and gossip paused, craning their necks skyward. Nobody had ever seen anything like this at a high school reunion before. A hush fell over the courtyard as the helicopter descended, landing with precision in the open field just beyond the parking lot. The skids touched down, stirring gravel and sending a sharp gust of wind outward, flattening skirts, ruffling hair, and flipping napkins across the asphalt. The noise was oppressive, commanding. Dawson stepped forward, squinting through the rotor wash, a creeping unease tugging at his chest. What the who?" he muttered, voice breaking slightly. His friends shuffled backward instinctively, unsure whether to laugh or run. Silas Ward, standing near the helicopter, held the door open and nodded toward the cockpit. Arlena emerged, the force of the rotor wash whipping her hair and the edges of her blazer dramatically. Every eye followed her movement, some in awe, some in shock, most in disbelief. Gone was the timid girl with slumped shoulders and hesitant eyes. In her place stood a woman forged by fire, heartbreak, and sheer determination. Her posture was tall, unyielding. Her gaze was steady and unflinching, scanning the crowd with a quiet authority. Every inch of her exuded confidence, power, and control. The wind seemed to part around her as she stepped onto the ground, boots landing with deliberate grace on the asphalt. Papers from the courtyard swirled around her like leaves caught in a current, but she didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. She didn't need anyone to announce her presence. The magnitude of her entrance did it all. Dawson's jaw dropped, eyes widening. Recognition collided with disbelief, but he couldn't place her fully. Something about the way she moved, the sharp intelligence in her gaze, the subtle elegance of her outfit. It was almost unrecognizable. He blinked, trying to reconcile the girl he had tormented with this unstoppable figure before him. The rest of the crowd began murmuring. Phones came out. Cameras lifted. Some students whispered, "Is that Arlena?" while others simply gawked. The familiar setting of the reunion felt smaller, diminished, irrelevant compared to the force of her arrival. Silas stepped aside, letting her move forward. She walked with a rhythm that conveyed command without arrogance. Each step reinforced the silent message. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer defined by their cruelty. She was someone who had survived, thrived, and built a life of her own making. The helicopter blade slowed, whirring down to a gentle hum, yet the echo of her arrival lingered in every eye fixed on her. Every whispered memory, every snicker from years past, seemed to shrink under the gravity of her presence. Dawson swallowed hard, his friends shifting uneasily beside him. The smugness he had carried for over a decade evaporated, replaced by a nervous tension he had never felt from her before. Arlena paused at the edge of the courtyard, scanning the crowd once more, letting the moment stretch, letting them absorb it, before she spoke, not yet raising her voice, but letting her presence alone communicate the years they had underestimated. As the last rotor stopped spinning, she took a single step forward, and every eye in the reunion hall turned completely toward her, realizing that the girl they had planned to humiliate had returned transformed, unstoppable, and fully in control. The gym doors swung open, and Arlena stepped inside, each footfall measured, deliberate, resonating with the power of every obstacle she had overcome. The chatter of reunion-goers faltered, mid-laugh, mid-sip, mid-conversation. She moved through the crowd, shoulders squared, eyes scanning, not with fear, but with the quiet authority of someone who had survived fire, betrayal, and years of underestimation. The projector screen flickered to life, mid-slideshow, the cruel images frozen, as if even technology itself paused to witness her entrance. Dawson and his friends stared in stunned silence. The smugness that had once fueled them faltered, replaced by a slow, creeping unease. Every humiliating caption, every photo of teenage embarrassment, now felt hollow, irrelevant in the presence of the woman who had risen from it. Arlena's gaze landed on Dawson. The boy who had made her middle school years unbearable now looked smaller somehow. Thin, tense, eyes darting nervously as if he feared being swallowed by the same spotlight he had tried to weaponize against her. She paused just a few feet from him, letting the weight of her presence settle across the gym like gravity. The murmurs around them swelled as attendees whispered and shifted, sensing the confrontation that was about to unfold. "You remember these?" she asked softly, nodding toward the frozen slideshow. The words carried no malice, only the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to reclaim. Dawson's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The rehearsed insults, the sneers he had perfected over years of memory and envy, evaporated instantly. The shame he had tried to bury beneath laughter and bravado clawed its way back into the light. Someone in the crowd, emboldened by the tension, whispered, "Is he nervous?" Arlena continued, voice low but steady. "You planned this to humiliate me, to remind me of every time I was too poor, too quiet, too different. But I survived. I thrived. And now, you're just waiting." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. She allowed it to stretch, forcing Dawson to confront the years he had spent attempting to control her narrative. The facade he had maintained, the perfect life, the smart decisions, the ease of adulthood, was cracking. A sharp whisper floated to the edges of the crowd. Dawson's ex-girlfriend's casual disclosure, overheard by someone taking a drink, slipped out like a blade. "Did you know he's barely holding it together? Bankruptcy, divorce, moving back in with his parents." The words spread like wildfire. Conversations fractured. Eyes darted toward Dawson as his friends murmured anxiously. The projection screen flickered once, almost in anticipation, the slideshow now irrelevant, overshadowed by the living reckoning in the room. Dawson's face went pale, the confident mask stripped away by years of lies and struggle. For the first time, everyone saw the truth. The boy who had tormented Arlena was not a success story. He was a man trapped by mediocrity, regret, and the very insecurities he had projected onto her for so long. Arlena's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, the smallest acknowledgement of the justice she had earned, not vengeance, but revelation. She didn't need to yell, she didn't need to mock. The exposure of his failure spoke louder than any words she could ever muster. Every eye in the room was fixed on her now, every whispered doubt and secreted cruelty laid bare. She had reclaimed the stage, the narrative, the power. And just as Dawson's shoulders slumped in silent defeat, Arlena's phone buzzed, a message from Silas flashing across the screen, hinting that the final act of her plan was about to unfold. The gym felt electric, suspended between the past and present. Arlena stepped fully into the room, the hum of whispers fading into a charged silence. Every eye followed her, every heartbeat syncing with hers. Dawson's friends shifted nervously, and the frozen slideshow of old humiliations seemed to melt into irrelevance beneath her commanding presence. She paused in the center of the gym, letting the weight of the moment settle. Years of fear, humiliation, and anger swirled in her chest, but she did not let them control her. Instead, she drew a deep breath, remembering Mr. Caldwell's words, "Lead with purpose. Build something that gives people a chance." This was her purpose. Dawson swallowed, finally finding his voice. "Arlena, I—" She lifted a hand, calm but firm. "Stop. Stop trying to explain. Stop trying to control what you can't anymore." Her eyes swept across the room, landing on the dozens of former classmates who had once laughed at her, whispered about her, or looked the other way. This isn't about humiliation. It's about accountability. And it's also about choice. The room held its collective breath. "You see," Arlena continued, voice steady, unwavering, "I could respond with revenge. I could tear apart the people who tried to define me for their amusement. I could make you relive every moment you thought gave you power over me." Her gaze softened slightly, scanning the faces of those who had grown uncomfortable under her attention. "But that's not who I am anymore." A murmur ran through the crowd. Dawson's jaw tightened, frustration flickering in his eyes. He had expected anger, theatrics, perhaps a public humiliation that mirrored what he had tried to inflict on her. Instead, Arlena took a single step forward, extending a hand, not in submission, not in weakness, but in the unexpected grace of choice. "I've built my life on growth, not grudges. I've learned that kindness and empathy carry more weight than cruelty ever could. I forgive the past, not for you, but for me. I refuse to let your cruelty chain me to my own pain any longer." Gasps, whispers, and even tears followed. Some former classmates found themselves rethinking their memories, the jokes they had shared, the indifference they had allowed. A few approached hesitantly, offering apologies they hadn't had the courage to voice before. Arlena accepted nods, a small smile encouraging their sincerity, but she remained unwavering, a beacon of empowerment rather than vengeance. Dawson, however, stood frozen, unable to process her grace. The facade of superiority, the years of bravado, the pride he had relied on, none of it shielded him from the reality of her transformation. He realized the girl he had tormented was gone. The woman before him was untouchable, and she chose to rise above, not against him. Across the gym, phones buzzed, cameras clicked, social media live streams captured her words. Her story of resilience and grace rippled outward, inspiring everyone in that room and beyond. The whispers of ridicule had been replaced with murmurs of admiration, of hope, of the power of choosing one's own path over repeating cycles of cruelty. Arlena exhaled slowly, allowing herself to feel the weight of closure. She had broken the chain, her story no longer defined by others, but by the choices she had made, the life she had built, the resilience she had cultivated. Then, a sharp noise at the gym doors drew everyone's attention. The air seemed to freeze. Arlena's gaze lifted, and the murmurs of the crowd fell into silence. Through the doorway, a familiar figure appeared, hesitant, unsure, yet unmistakable. Her father. He stepped into the gym, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly, and for the first time, it was clear that he had come seeking something, redemption, explanation, or forgiveness, and the room held its collective breath, waiting for her next move. The gym held its breath as her father's silhouette froze in the doorway. Time seemed to stretch, the murmurs of the reunion fading into a quiet, charged stillness. Arlena's heart pounded, not with fear, but with cautious curiosity. She had survived fire, betrayal, humiliation, and years of being underestimated. Yet the man who had abandoned her for so long now stood there, unguarded, vulnerable in a way that made the air itself tremble. He cleared his throat, voice low and trembling. "Arlena, I—" She held up a hand, letting him know she was listening but not yet yielding. He swallowed, as though each word cost him something he had never admitted aloud. "I wasn't there, because I was scared. Scared of failing you, scared of not being able to provide, scared of facing the world when I had nothing to give. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I see now. I was wrong. I left you, and I left your mother, and I—" His voice broke, raw with remorse. Arlena's chest ached with decades of pain, but she felt an unexpected warmth seep into the cracks of her heart. She realized that all the anger, all the betrayal, had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. She could choose now how to respond. She stepped forward, her voice calm, yet unwavering. "I survived without you. I thrived without you. But I can't forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of the weight of this anger." Her father's eyes welled with tears. For the first time in years, he saw the woman she had become. Powerful, confident, unstoppable, and compassionate. She didn't need him to validate her achievements. She had done that herself. But this moment of acknowledgement, this honesty, was a key to unlocking her final freedom. The crowd, silent and attentive, felt the shift in the room. Forgiveness, not vengeance, hung in the air like a palpable force. Arlena felt her shoulders lighten, her chest expand. She had carried years of pain, but now she stepped into the space of liberation, unburdened and whole. She looked around the gym one last time. The faces of former bullies, friends, strangers, classmates. The whispers of ridicule, the long-held grudges, the petty cruelties. They were all powerless against the life she had built, the love she had fostered, the resilience she had cultivated. Turning toward the doors, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sunset painted the sky in blazing streaks of gold and crimson, a horizon of infinite possibility. The helicopter that had brought her here hovered gently above, a symbol of her dramatic, deliberate reclamation of power. She inhaled deeply, feeling the wind lift her hair, feeling the freedom of every choice she had made to survive, to forgive, to rise. The world ahead was vast, open, and hers to shape. Arlena spoke softly to herself, words that could echo in anyone's heart who had felt small, powerless, or unseen. We cannot control the cruelty of others, but we can control how we rise. We cannot undo the past, but we can choose kindness, empathy, and courage in every moment. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is liberation. And when we rise above, we shine not just for ourselves, but for every soul who will follow. With that, she walked toward her future, every step a declaration of resilience, every breath a celebration of life reclaimed. The shadows of yesterday remained behind her, replaced by the brilliance of what was yet to come. And the world, vast and open, awaited her with endless possibility. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Every act of kindness, every choice to rise above cruelty, can change your life and the lives of those around you. Share this video to inspire someone who needs courage today. And remember, your past doesn't define you, your choices do. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds us all to be stronger, kinder, and unstoppable.